So let's clear the noise first, because the headlines were doing the absolute most. On day 2 in court, Justin Baldoni showed up. Blake Lively did not. And somehow that turned into Blake Lively failed to appear for settlement showdown. That's not what happened. The settlement talks already went down the day before. They were in mediation for 6 to 7 hours and walked away without a deal. That chapter closed. Day 2 was about a completely separate, related matter involving Baldoni's former publicist. But if you only read the headlines, you'd think Blake ghosted court like it was a bad date. And here's where it gets interesting. Day 2 wasn't about Blake being absent. It was about a related case connected to Baldoni's former publicist, Stephanie Jones. Baldoni and his current publicist had previously filed claims alleging that private messages were shared, messages that later became central evidence in Blake's lawsuit against him. That's the real legal thread being pulled here. Yet media framing turned it into a personality storyline instead of a procedural one. When Baldoni arrived at the Manhattan Federal Courthouse around 9:56 a.m., he looked calm, composed, walking beside his wife Emily. No chaos, no drama, no showdown energy, just another day in ongoing litigation. And Blake? She was never scheduled to be there. That detail matters, because mediation, which is what happened the previous day, doesn't work like courtroom TV scenes. The two parties don't sit across from each other trading lines. They're placed in separate rooms. The judge acts as a literal go-between, carrying offers and counteroffers back and forth. It's controlled, strategic, and honestly kind of anticlimactic from the outside, which makes the storming out narrative even wilder. After roughly 6 hours of negotiation the day before, both sides left. That's it. No explosive exit, no dramatic confrontation, just lawyers, spouses, and legal teams walking out after a long day. But let's zoom out. The fact that no settlement was reached is bigger than any outfit breakdown or courthouse smile, because mediation is usually where high-profile disputes quietly disappear. NDAs get signed, statements get softened, both sides walk away saying it was a mutual decision. That didn't happen here. Baldoni's attorney, Brian Freeman, made it clear as they exited the case was not resolved and they were confident moving forward. Translation, this is headed toward trial unless something drastic changes. And that's significant, because settlements, especially in celebrity cases, often come with confidentiality walls. If this had ended in a private agreement, the public would likely never know what was conceded, what was admitted, or what was negotiated behind closed doors. The narrative would fill in the blanks on its own. Instead, the absence of a deal keeps everything exposed. Another layer people missed, during mediation, both sides reportedly stepped out periodically, lawyers grabbing air, quick coffees, short consultations. At one point, Baldoni allegedly came out urgently needing to speak with his wife. Whether that was strategic, emotional, or logistical, we don't know. What we do know is that whatever was discussed inside those rooms wasn't enough to close the gap. And this isn't just about money. Legal analysts have pointed out that when cases carry reputational stakes this high, compromise becomes harder. It's not just financial exposure, it's career trajectory, public perception, and long-term credibility. Once accusations and counterclaims hit this level of visibility, both sides have more to lose by appearing to back down. That's why day 2 mattered. Not because someone failed to appear, but because it confirmed something bigger. Mediation didn't fix this. The conflict remains active. Motions are pending. A judge still has decisions to make regarding what claims survive and what gets dismissed. The spectacle headlines might focus on who wore what or who smiled at photographers, but legally, the real headline is simple: no settlement, case ongoing, trial increasingly likely. And that shifts the entire energy of this story. Now that mediation is officially off the table, the energy around this case changes completely.
Because when a settlement fails after 6 or 7 hours behind closed doors, that usually means one thing. Neither side was willing to give the other what they actually wanted. And what they wanted likely wasn't just a number. Let's talk about why this mediation collapsing matters so much. In high-profile disputes like this, settlement is often the cleanest exit. Both sides protect their image, lawyers draft a polished joint statement. Words like amicable resolution get thrown around. The public gets a vague summary and moves on. But that didn't happen here. Instead, Baldoni's legal team walked out and made it very clear the case is not resolved, and they're confident heading toward trial. That's not the tone of someone relieved to quietly wrap things up. That's the tone of someone prepared to litigate publicly. Which brings us to what's actually at stake. This isn't just about two former co-stars with creative differences. This is a layered legal battle involving private communications, public claims, reputational fallout, and alleged misuse of information. The related case involving Baldoni's former publicist centers on claims that private messages were shared, messages that later became critical in Blake's lawsuit. That detail alone makes settlement complicated, because if one side believes evidence was improperly handled or strategically distributed, you're not just negotiating damages, you're negotiating accountability, and accountability is harder to price. There's also the psychological layer. Mediation works best when both sides are motivated to avoid risk, but trials come with discovery, testimony, cross-examination, public records. Once you pass on settlement, you're basically saying, I'm comfortable putting this in front of a judge, maybe even a jury. And juries don't just evaluate facts, they evaluate perception, which is why the optics around this case have been so dissected. Remember the coverage highlighting wardrobe costs and arrival times? Blake arriving first with luxury accessories, Baldoni arriving later, coincidentally color-coordinated? On the surface, it sounds superficial, but perception shapes narrative, and narrative influences how everyday observers interpret legal conflicts. Imagine being a juror making standard jury compensation, watching headlines about $9,000 bags and designer shoes. Fair or not, that imagery can subconsciously frame power dynamics. That's why image control matters in cases like this. But here's the deeper strategic issue: confidentiality. If a settlement had been reached with strict confidentiality, neither party would be able to publicly clarify the terms. The public would only know that the case was dropped. And historically, when high-profile plaintiffs settle, outside observers often interpret that as the defendant conceding something, even if that's not legally accurate. Without transparency, perception fills in the blanks. That may be one reason negotiations didn't land. If one side wanted confidentiality and the other wanted public clarity, that's a fundamental mismatch. You can't compromise on whether details stay hidden or become part of the record. It's either sealed or it's not. And based on how firmly Baldoni's attorneys spoke after court, very confident about moving forward, it doesn't sound like they were eager to wrap this quietly. There's also the procedural reality ahead. Now the focus shifts to motions for summary judgment. That's where the judge reviews the legal arguments and evidence and decides which claims are strong enough to proceed to trial and which get dismissed. It's basically a legal filter. If key claims survive that stage, the pressure intensifies. Because once trial becomes real, everything escalates. Depositions become strategic chess matches. Internal communications get dissected. Public scrutiny increases. And both careers continue operating under a legal cloud. And this is where the absence of settlement speaks volumes. Most entertainment industry disputes don't make it this far. They resolve quietly, because prolonged litigation is expensive, financially and reputationally. The fact that this didn't resolve suggests both parties believe their positions are defensible in open court. That's not casual confidence, it's calculated. And while day 2 may have looked calm, no dramatic confrontation, no emotional outbursts, legally it confirmed something major. Neither side blinked, which means this isn't cooling down, it's solidifying.
So where does this actually leave things? Right now, the case moves into its most technical and most critical phase, judicial review. Before any jury ever hears a word, the judge has to decide what even survives.
Motions for summary judgment are basically legal reality checks. Each side argues that the other doesn't have enough evidence to justify a trial. The judge reviews filings, evidence, and legal standards, then determines what gets dismissed and what moves forward. This stage doesn't come with paparazzi chaos or outfit breakdowns. It comes with paperwork, legal reasoning, cold analysis. And depending on what survives, the entire tone of the case shifts. If significant claims are thrown out, leverage changes instantly. If most claims remain intact, pressure intensifies. Either way, the next move isn't about public narrative, it's about judicial interpretation. Another important detail people overlook: mediation failing doesn't mean talks can never happen again. Technically, parties can still negotiate privately at any time. But once both sides publicly project confidence about going to trial, backing away becomes harder without looking strategic, and perception still matters. This case has already evolved beyond a private dispute. It now lives in legal filings, media cycles, and online analysis. Every court appearance fuels speculation. Every attorney comment gets clipped and shared. Once that level of visibility exists, decisions aren't just legal, they're reputational. And reputational stakes are powerful. For Baldoni, pushing toward trial signals certainty. It suggests a belief that transparency favors his position. For Lively, maintaining her claims through judicial review reinforces that her legal team believes the evidence holds weight. Both sides, in their own ways, are projecting strength. But strength in litigation is a long game. Trials aren't quick. They're expensive, they're emotionally draining, they involve discovery, depositions, and the possibility of uncomfortable details becoming public record. And unlike mediation, where outcomes can be shaped behind closed doors, trial outcomes are controlled by judicial process and evidentiary rules. There's also the unpredictability factor. Judges are guided by law, juries are guided by interpretation, and high-profile cases often carry emotional undertones whether attorneys want them to or not. That's why summary judgment rulings are so important. They narrow the battlefield before anything reaches a jury box. For now, the visible phase pauses. No dramatic courthouse exits, no settlement press releases, just legal teams preparing filings and waiting on judicial decisions. And here's the key takeaway from these 2 days in court. Nothing ended. No deal was struck, no claims were withdrawn, no quiet resolution happened off camera. Instead, the case hardens. When mediation fails, both sides essentially say, "We're willing to risk this in open court." That's not impulsive, that's deliberate. So while headlines focused on who did or didn't show up, the real development was structural. The path forward is now procedural, not performative. And unless something dramatically shifts behind the scenes, the next major moment won't be about arrival times or coordinated colors. It'll be about what the judge allows to stand. That's where this story truly moves next, not in spectacle, but in rulings.